And remember, you're a tiger, kid! A tiger!
Nintendo has a lot of franchises that seem to be forgotten by the company for one reason or another, which is a shame because a lot of these franchises have good games in them. But of all dead franchises Nintendo has, my personal favorite is probably Punch-Out! Punch-Out is a series of boxing games where you take the role as an underdog and you fight big scary men. Instead of like most fighting games where you're free to move around, in Punch-Out you're stationed in one spot. Basically, all the buttons for your controller are for dodging or punching your opponent's lights out. And despite being a success in some of its releases, Nintendo doesn't seem to want to bring back the series. Well, whether they do or don't, I'm going to take a look at all the Punch-Out games we got so far. In 1984, Nintendo made Punch-Out because they wanted to experiment having 2 monitor displays in arcade machines. And at the time, it worked, I think. I mean, I'd never seen one in person, but that's what the frickin' thing looks like. And the game was a success in arcades. You take the role of a boxer, which you can name yourself. The top screen is used to display the fighter's profile and their health, and the bottom screen is used to display the power meter and the fight. And like I mentioned earlier, the controls mainly revolve around punching and dodging opponents. Whenever the game lets you know a character is about to land a punch, their eyes flash yellow. I get at the time it was probably the best option, but it just looks weird nowadays. This game has a total of 6 characters you fight against, and each of them have their own patterns and moves you have to learn. And there is no ending in the game. After you beat the last challenger, Mr. Sandman, the game just loops. Within the same year, Nintendo released the sequel to Punch-Out! Super Punch-Out! Super Punch-Out has stronger opponents and you can duck, which opens more patterns you have to learn throughout the game. The graphics of both these games look really good, and at the time when they came out they were a success. But they're not really the best ways to play Punch-Out! You can buy these games on the eShop for the Switch nowadays for $8, but the controls feel kinda sluggish and there's not really much content in the game since these are just arcade games. So in my honest opinion, you're probably better off getting the Switch Online membership and playing the NES port, as well as being able to play loads of other games.
Cigarette case? No. Game Watch. Multi-screen.
Game & Watch games are generally known for being overly generic and more of a novelty than an actual game. Like here's Donkey Kong for the NES, and here's Donkey Kong on the Game & Watch. They released a console for the Microversus line called Boxing, but in North America it was called Punch-Out! To have better sales. It's technically debatable as to whether or not this is really a Punch-Out! Game, but I wanted to talk about it anyways. And to avoid any confusion, I'll refer to this game as its original title. Boxing almost feels like a different game because it's in a sideways point of view, but the punching and dodging controls are all there. Something that caught me off guard at first was that the health is represented by numbers, not by the bar. The bar is actually the stamina, and the lower the stamina goes, the weaker you are to be knocked down. You do this until the actual health number goes down to 0, and that's how you win and lose every round. Boxing is an interesting piece of Game & Watch and Punch-Out history, but it's obviously a very primitive way to play Punch-Out! Arm Wrestling is the only spin-off in the Punch-Out series. It was released only in America, exclusively in arcades in 1985. The gameplay is very different compared to Punch-Out because it's arm wrestling instead of boxing, but the characters in this game have patterns you have to learn in order to beat them. And it even has its own power meter. All the characters in this game are very Punch-Out-esque, and Bald Bull even makes his own surprise cameo. Since this is an arcade game, there's only a handful of characters and nothing really to the game other than the gameplay. But as a spin-off to Punch-Out!, it actually works really well, and I actually would have loved to see this become its own series of games. Growing up, I played a bunch of NES games on my dad's original NES, and I still even have them to this day. But of all the games I had in the shoebox, the one I remember playing the most was Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! When porting Punch-Out! To Nintendo's home console, the Famicom, Nintendo decided to sign a deal with famous heavyweight boxer Mike Tyson, to have him featured in the game as the final boss. During this time, Mike Tyson at a young age of 21 had a really great boxing career going for him. And to reflect this, Nintendo made him one of the hardest bosses in gaming. The story follows a character named Little Mac and his journey to be the best boxer in the world. You fight against 14 opponents in this game, which is an outstanding improvement compared to the arcade releases. And the controls feel way more fluent in this game. On the arcade games, you had to toggle the joystick up and down to swap hitting jabs and uppercuts, but in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, by default, Little Mac has his fist down, so all you have to do is push the up button to do an uppercut, which is way more convenient. Instead of having a power meter, they introduced star punches in this game. Basically, a star punch is a really powerful uppercut to your enemy. The character Vodka Drunkinski had his name famously changed to Soda Popinski in order to be more child-friendly, but weirdly throughout the game he makes alcohol references. Every fighter has their own pattern, and their body actually flashes a color instead of having cracked out eyes like the last game. There's 3 circuits in total, which makes the game a bit longer, but there's passwords you can use to get where you left off. Or cheat like I did. And of course, after you beat all the circuits, you get to fight Iron Mike himself. One hit from Mike Tyson in the first round is an instant knockdown. However, if you manage to somehow beat him, Mike Tyson compliments your finger speed of all things. This game overall is a massive improvement in the series and pretty much solidified the series altogether to be what Punch-Out is known as today.
Dear Lord, please give me the cheat codes for Mike Tyson's Punch-Out.
However though, depending on what copy you have, the game actually could be different. I actually didn't know this until I got into game collecting, but in 1990 Nintendo re-released Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, but unfortunately got rid of Mike Tyson due to the contract between them expiring. There's nothing different from the re-release other than replacing the final boss, Mike Tyson, with the now Mr. Dream. Even though it's all the same game, I figured I should bring it up anyways because this is the version Nintendo puts out digitally on their console nowadays. The only official way to play Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is on the original cartridge.
Oh yeah!
The next installment of the Punch-Out franchise was released on the Super Nintendo in 1994. With how well Punch-Out sold in the NES, it was no surprise as to why a sequel was made. However, strangely, the gameplay is more like the original arcade version than the NES port. Firstly, the graphics look great, of course. I'd even say so far the graphics look better than ever. But they actually look more like the arcade's graphics than the NES's graphics. And secondly, this game brought back new and old characters, some originally and only from the arcade games. Now, you might be thinking, where's Little Mac? For some reason, he decided to change his look and ditch Doc Lewis. This whole game is pretty much like an updated version of the arcade games. They even brought back the power meter. Personal preference, but to me, the characters in this game feel the most bland in the series so far. But there's a whopping 16 of them, which is the most so far, with mainly new characters too. After 28 years, players found out that if you held a button combination while you booted it up, you could select a fighter for the second player. The fact something this tiny was only found decades after the game came out is insane. It makes you wonder what other secrets are real out there. Overall, I personally find this one to be just fine, but I can understand why some people might prefer this one over the other ones.
That's it. Come on, baby. Come on. Come on. Dance like a fly, bite like a mosquito.
I don't know what that means, Doc.
Don't know what it means? Come over here. I'll tell you.
For the next 15 years, there was no word of any new Punch-Out game. This might not seem like a lot of time, but let me remind you what happened during this time period. Nintendo released their consoles, the Nintendo 64, the GameCube, the Wii, and continued dominating the market for handhelds. So it was a long and quiet period for the franchise, until in 2008 it was revealed that the next installment of Punch-Out was in the works. Then in 2009 we got Punch-Out for the Wii. This game actually has a mix of characters from all the previous games we got so far, with only one additional new character. I'm not too bothered by the inclusion of one new character, but Disco Kid is overall a really underwhelming inclusion. You fight him in the minor circuit, and he's really easy to beat quickly. The controls are mainly like the NES's, with the inclusion of ducking, and they even brought back the star meter. There are 2 control methods, old school NES style, and nunchuck Wii style. I played them both and I think they're both fine, but personally I prefer the old school style. The characters all play similarly as they did before, but the patterns have all changed to be more complex. This game portrays every character way better than every previous game so far, and all the fighters have somewhat of a backstory before every fight. There was a lot of characters I found personally enjoyable to fight, even though they were hard as piss sometimes. A lot like Punch-Out for the NES, there's 3 circuits, and between every one of them, there's a cutscene showing Little Mac training for his next challenge. In this game, there's 13 opponents who fight, and even a surprise cameo of Donkey Kong. This game is pretty much overall like the perfect remake of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. and quite possibly the best entry in the franchise so far. Honestly, the only thing I would say that's bad about this game is that we haven't gotten a sequel for it. But unfortunately, this is where Punch-Out has come to an end. But there hasn't been a clear reasoning as to why Nintendo never brought it back, which really sucks because a franchise can go dead for an infinite number of reasons. If I were to be honest though, I personally don't mind there not being a new Punch-Out game. Don't get me wrong, I would love to see a Punch-Out game as much as the next guy, but Punch-Out for the Wii perfected everything Mike Tyson's Punch-Out had, and added more content. I mean, even a re-release of that game would be just as cool as a new Punch-Out game. But as of now, I'm glad Punch-Out ended with a great game.
Keep hitting me. I love it.
Well, I gotta get trained for a boxing match. I was gonna use Mike Tyson's Punch-Out to train, but somebody stole it. Which means I'll have to use the next best thing.
Okay.